Former Rhode Island Attorney General Arlene Violet, presently the attorney for a large group of the retirees, nurses who are now facing a 40% cut in their pension payments with the failure, collapse, receivership of the St. Joseph's Pension Fund, the largest pension fund collapse in Rhode Island history. Arlene Violet, come on in.
Well, thank you, Josh.
Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Good to see
My
you.
pleasure.
Perfect location. So, as you know, go local, and we've spoken a number of times during the past few weeks since I think it was August 17th. The pension fund went into court and sought a receivership. And give a little overview from your standpoint of where we are today.
Well, first of all, it's absolutely horrid that anyone in that pension system is even subjected to this issue. I know the diocese has said, oh, it's not us, there's a board. Of course it's them, because the board that was administrating it were direct appointees by the bishop, and of course the head of it was the chancellor of the diocese, who's like the right-hand man, certainly for the bishop. And it really demoralizes me that the church really is engaging in this fig leaf argument that it's not their responsibility. But in any event, the clients that I represent are the elderly nurses, the people who change the linens, the janitors, all the old timers who are now 70 and 80 years old. And back in those days, Josh, perhaps the most money that any nurse made, and that was the top of the pyramid, was $25,000 a year. That, of course, then gave them meager Social Security checks. What the diocese did then is say, we're going to ascribe 50% of that, and we're taking it off your pension. So if you were going to get $1,000 Social Security, they would take $500 of it off the pension they were giving you. And even though it was health care oriented, they got no health care, they got nothing, and it was frozen for life. So I have in my people that I'm representing, for example, nurses who worked 40 or 50 years.
Oh my God.
They're getting $750, and now they expect them to get a 40% haircut. Well, over my dead body. That is so unfair. So what I'm trying to do on behalf of the little guys, as their pro bono lawyer, of course I'm not charging them. Robert Senville and I are both working together on this case. He's a great lawyer. What we're trying to say is it only looks fair to give a 40% across the board. It isn't when it comes to our clients, because for them, they are so low economically to start with. You're going to be plunging them into the poverty level, and after 50 years of work, they shouldn't be like, oh, go collect welfare kind of thing then.
Yeah, it's a horrible situation, and if you really look at it, nurses, a lot of those nurses, stayed because of their commitment to St. Joseph's, to the Catholic Church. They could have gone across the street to Rhode Island Hospital, taken a 50% pay increase. They were there at the golden era of nursing when people were getting signing bonuses to switch hospitals.
And they were told that was their ministry. They worked nonstop during the 78 blizzard, never got paid overtime, and it is just a disgrace how they're being handled, particularly by the church. So Max Wistow, who's a great lawyer, he's working with the receiver to try to see if there's any deep pockets so we can put money back into that pension because of negligence or something like that.
I think history will show that if there are any pockets, Max will find where those pockets
are. He certainly is a good attorney.
Let's ding through some of the issues. We've written tremendously about it. I think we've probably written 20 distinct stories about it. Let's go through some of the players in it. So first of all, the hospital was owned by the diocese and operated by the diocese up through 2009.
Both hospitals, Fatima as well as St. Joseph's.
And at the time of the transition from being independent and controlled by the diocese over to Roger Williams, then Roger Williams Medical Center, the chair of the board was the bishop of that. So it's a little hard to say he didn't know what was going on, etc. So during that play, this looks to be that the Diocese of Providence has some culpability related to the underfunding, which also it looks like it's coming out, that it was underfunded even before the sale.
And it could have be that the fact that that was like a secular hospital changed the nature of this, even being a so-called church plan. I'm sure Max Wistow will look into that. Of course, there are people who are doing the investments. How could we have such a bull market for almost a decade now and that place lose money? And then we have what happened with the calculation that $14 million would be sufficient and fund it to 90%. Totally wrong, totally off as a number. So I think there's a lot of those kinds of issues that Max and the receiver will dig out. But what my job is not to allow people who've worked 40 or 50 years, had peanut salaries to start with, have peanuts for a pension, now to be plunged into poverty because...
And the stress is tremendous. I mean, I've spoken to a number of them. So we go from 2009, the asset, the health services of St. Joe gets transferred over to Roger Williams Medical Center. There's some culpability there, right? No one really delves into it once Roger Williams takes over. Roger Williams has had its own problems during that period of time, and they're sort of in a rebuilding phase. They try and sell first to a number of different for-profit hospitals, but ultimately in 2014, they are sold, Roger Williams, St. Joe's, over to Charter Care, a California-based healthcare company for-profit. They come in, they strike a deal, and two entities, two regulatory agencies, the Department of Health coupled with the Attorney General's office, and they have distinct responsibilities. The Department of Health looks at the patients and what the care will be, and the Attorney General looks at the assets, right? He has the fiduciary regulatory responsibility. And that doesn't seem to get paid attention to as well.
Well, it's obvious that something was amok. The $14 million to totally stabilize was insufficient at that point. I think what a Max Wistar will look for is whether there were deliberate misrepresentations in the paperwork submitted to the Attorney General, because something I know about the Attorney General tends to have an immunity. So it's not like you can sue him for negligence if it turns out, as it appears, that he was negligent in reviewing that deal.
So that regulatory review seems, as Steve Del Sesto, the receiver, has mentioned, it looks like that full funding of $14 million that was supposed to stabilize maybe could have stabilized the fund for 10 years. But the realistic longevity of that fund, because there were people in that fund as late as coming in as 207 or 208, depending on their class, really need to run for 45 years. So there's a mammoth gap of funding that never took place.
And while I have said it's awful that anyone is suffering this insult to their plans, my people that I represent, the poor janitor, the house cleaner, the nurses, LPNs, they are the people who are so old now, they are unable to enter into the workforce. So unlike, regrettably, the ones that were kept on at Fatima, they at least have a job. They have a collective bargaining unit that can get more pension money for them in the future and higher salaries. Just one point, like the highest salary any of my people ever got was $11 an hour. It's $44 an hour now if you're a nurse, okay? So the Social Security and all of that for the present people, even though they're technically retired, they've got a chance to recover. My 88-year-olds in wheelchairs that are deaf, etc., they've got no place to go but down, and it's my job to try to make sure that doesn't happen to them.
So from 2004 until 2014 until August 17th, there's no indication by anyone publicly or privately, as best as anybody can uncover, that there's a problem in the fund until the existing fund, made up of people appointed by the bishop, walks into Superior Court and Judge Silverstein and says, this thing's bankrupt, put it into receivership.
Well, it's time, I guess, for a deep dive, into that pension. What happened? Ted Seidel, who is brilliant in my view in terms of looking into pensions, has made the comment that if you steal a little over and over again, you go to Vail, as in Colorado, to ski. But if you steal a couple of times and it's huge, you're the person that goes to jail. So I think it's imperative that we look to see, was this skimming going on periodically, episodically? What went on? It's we've got
a strange situation, and it reminds us a little bit, we've written about it, of 38 Studios, where the Attorney General, in the case of 38 Studios, the Attorney General was a member of the legislature, had previously, just 10 weeks earlier, been in the leadership of the legislature, goes and votes for the legislation that approves the $75 million loan guarantee
Yes.
to 38 studios. In this situation, he played a key regulatory role in the review under the Hospital
Right.
Conversion Act. And does he need to, is it time for him, in everyone's best interest, including his own, to recuse himself from this process and step forward, be a leader, and say, I need to step aside so that someone can come in here, not just the receiver and Max Wistow, who have a particular role, but from a standpoint of an attorney general?
Well, I think he's obviously keeping himself in place. He certainly has a conflict of interest because it's his work now being potentially reviewed, whether he can be sued or not because of the immunity issue. He most certainly should step aside. But I certainly think that's going to become an issue in the upcoming Attorney General's race for the state.
The woman who was the staffer, 23 years Assistant Attorney General in that office, 25 years a state attorney, just 2.5 weeks after the plan goes into receivership, she leaves the Attorney General's office. Unusual situation.
Well, I'm sure, I don't know whether she's a scapegoat or not, time will tell, but I certainly think we're going to find out a lot more of why that happened, because I'm sure the lawyers will be asking for deposition.
Yeah. So I think everybody anticipates that the receiver and Max Wistow will have some subpoenas, and those will be going out in the next few weeks. That's going to put a tremendous amount of opportunity to peek under the tent here.
Right.
The Attorney General, does he need to answer a subpoena?
Oh, absolutely.
Does the
Absolutely.
bishop?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And will you be at that table during those depositions?
Technically, the receiver can only have, if he wants Max Wistow to.
Okay.
We would require the permission of the court. So right now, what I'm at least looking at is to do anything I can to help support their efforts to get money back into the pot. But for my people, who are the eldest, disabled, retirees with pennies on a dollar, and after all their sacrifice of 30, 40, 50 years working there, my job is to make sure that we don't plunge them into poverty. I'm there to fight for them.
Monday, I believe it was Monday, you had a meeting over in
I
East
did.
Providence, and you had a pretty good-sized crowd over there.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. People coming in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
It was awful. It broke my
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah. And how is the mood of those who are being impacted? I've spoken to some, and I would say most of the ones that I've spoken to, I would say, are in their late 50s, early 60s, and the stress on them
Is unbelievable.
I cannot imagine for somebody who's beyond a fixed income and beyond a limited income. These are not people who are going to have to cut back on their golf course
That's right.
fees. These
That's
are
right.
people who are living on the margin as it is.
They're in my generation, and in my generation, you always had the rate change for the bus.
Yeah,
you didn't
right.
buy something unless you had the money, right? And to make these people go through this suffering is unconscionable. And I really want to peg the people who are making this stress in their lives, and hopefully, please God, I stop them from being financially harmed.
Well, they've got a great advocate. We work together all the
Yeah.
time, and you're a wonderful resource, I think, to the media in Rhode Island. You have this great perspective that's decades long, and you call it as you see it. I mean, there's no flies. I don't ever want to get called out by Arlene Violet. That's my goal.
No, you won't have to be, unlike some folks.
How long is this process going to take? Do you get any sense?
Well, regrettably, it's going to take a long time. It is so difficult, particularly to find fraud if it exists within the securities area. We're talking several years at least. Meanwhile, my job is to make sure that my people, the poorest of the poor of those retirees, aren't harmed, and that because of undue hardship, they don't get a haircut.
One of the groups we've looked at, and we have some of the documents, not all of them yet, is the actuarial who did the analysis for the pension fund. And we've seen, I think, years 214, 215, 216, something like that. They could see the train going off the rails. I understand that their responsibility is to their client, but do they have a broader responsibility? I mean, they could see this coming forward, certainly for those 3 years. You can read it in the documents. The numbers get bigger, the gaps get bigger, there's no money going into the fund. Did they have a responsibility of to raise a red flag?
Well, I understand they did raise how much money should be going
Yeah.
in, which is probably what their duties were. But you know, in the final analysis, everybody was sort of lazy in this case because they were thinking, well, nothing's going to happen because it's a church plan. And under federal law, you can't sue a church plan, no matter how grossly negligent they were, et cetera. A recent Supreme Court case blocks
But a
that.
little earlier case in
Yeah.
down in New Jersey
Yeah.
showed that transition in and out of a healthcare structure somewhat voided that
That's what we're
church
hoping.
plan.
That's what we're
contingent.
hoping, at least at the time that Roger Williams Hospital comes into the picture, that you can do that. But putting aside, you know, we're talking legalities, as
Right.
you know. We're really talking about people's lives who lived their lives miraculously. They took care of all these sick people during their lives. They did everything right. And the damage that's being done to them, particularly because of the effrontery of the church and its lack of responsibility here, it's appalling.
Well, I think, you know, we've, you know, we're about as knee deep in this as you are, or as the receiver, Max Wistow. There's a moral obligation in this
Absolutely.
situation. And, you know, we're talking about churches, nonprofit hospitals, for-profit hospitals, attorney generals, you know.
What's wrong with this
yeah,
picture?
Right? Like, if nobody can raise a flag on those things. So, listen, this is not going to go away. There's another meeting coming up. The receiver has a
October
meeting.
11th.
And then there's a big court hearing on October 11th. So we're going to see a lot of things happen over the next few weeks. Max Wistow will certainly be, you know, he's always one to make news. And, you know, he's on a little bit of a roll right now.
Good for him.
So there's
Well,
no
thanks
flies on
for
him.
all the great investigative work.
Thank you
Go
so
Local
much.
Prob is doing, Josh. Thank you.
General, thank you so much.
My
We
pleasure.
appreciate it, and we'll be in touch shortly.
Thank you.
Good luck to the
Thank
rest.